Recording in progress.
This is a vision module that basically talks about the importance of prolific gospel sharing in a robust and healthy discipleship process. And the reason I'm going to get into this module in just a second, but in the last few weeks and months, people have brought me in on some discipleship processes, and almost all of them are they're really good, but they focus on me discipling other believers, and they do get to some multiplication within believers, but ultimately for true multiplication to happen, we gotta jump the tracks and get to lostness. So if all we're doing is meeting with believers and doing, and by the way, most of those discipleship processes have a week or two about gospel sharing, but none of them ever spend more than a week, and there's zero modeling when it comes to gospel sharing. It's you go out and figure it out on your own. So this module kind of speaks to that. And so what you need to do is we're going to create like we're going to grid this, and we're going to have a vertical line. This is, I think, considered the y-axis if you're into math. And what I want you to put up here is intentional. Intentional at the top. And at the bottom, I want you to write the opposite of that. Let me make sure I get that. Get that. What you write? Unintentional. All right. At the bottom. And then the horizontal, right in the middle, if you can, just write right across the middle there. I want you to write the word timid. And I want you to write the word bold. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to take just a few minutes to kind of diagnose ourselves. So let me define the terms and the quadrant, so to speak. So intentional is you are intentionally in your calendar, you're intentionally setting up time to get in front of lostness. Whether that's some type of entry strategy that shows up on your calendar, whether that's door to door, you're going to a food pantry, you're some way of getting in front of lost people, a clinic, something. I don't care what, a backyard Bible study, something that intentionally puts you in front of lostness. And so you're intentional with it, highly intentional. And so you have unintentional, you never schedule it. And then the vertical, or I'm sorry, the horizontal line represents your posture towards sharing the gospel. We have timid over here. You, for whatever reason, you don't get to it. And then third is bold. Okay. So basically, what we take is, where do you find yourself in this quadrant, in these four boxes? And so just kind of put yourself, I'm intentional but timid, then you put yourself right there, and or so, or whatever that case may be. Sometimes it's also good, where do you see your church? Do you see your church over here? The vast majority of leadership, or what that may be. So let me take some time just to define each of these categories in terms of, so let's start down here. This is somebody who is unintentional. They're organic, so to speak, within opportunities. If the opportunity presents itself, they're going to go there. They're ready to share the gospel, whether it's a pamphlet or whatever. So we're going to call that person, when it comes to the gospel, they're at best sporadic. Um, is if the opportunity presents itself at work, at play, at the ballpark, wherever, they'll go there. They're ready. They have a tool, and but they're unintentional. If it happens, it happens. And so let me work our way over to here. Now, if this person's unintentional, they have no time plan to share the gospel or get out in front of lost people, and when the opportunity presents itself, they just never get there for whatever reason. It's not their personality, whatever they want to call it. We're gonna rip the band-aid off here, and we're gonna say they're disobedient. And I just don't know any other word to put there. Now, they might be uh, obedient in other areas of life, Bible reading, prayer, the good father or parent, or whatever. But in the area of gospel sharing and making disciples, we're gonna label that as disobedient. That's kind of ripping the Band-Aid off. Now, over here is somebody who puts themselves in front of lostness. Like, again, it can be, there's a million ways you can do that, I guess, entry strategies, but they never get to the gospel. It's just good. They're they're nice or whatever. We're going to call that low impact. And I'm going to define this a little bit more because this is a rather large category. Now, this person over here, they're intentional to put themselves in front of lostness on a regular basis. It's on their calendar. And they're bold to get to the message of the kingdom. We're going to call that a disciple maker. And I know that's a loaded term, but when you think about it, Jesus's first words to his disciples, or some of his first words that's recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is if you follow me, you will fish for men. The key marker of a disciple maker is a pursuer or a fisher of men. Now, let me say a little bit about these categories. And I'd want to camp out on this one because this is where I see most of the mission activity when I talk to churches, at least locally and even internationally. It's a lot of great activity. Their backpacks, they're feeding the poor, they're doing something very good. They're meeting a need in the community. It's usually need-based, which is very, very biblical, compassion-based, but they rarely get to the message of the kingdom. And I call that low impact because it makes a big impact on us, but it makes a low impact on the mission of God because we never get to the message of the kingdom. In fact, I would suggest to you that a lot of mercy-based ministries cloud the gospel because if you start with need and then get to the gospel, it usually clouds their intentions. You don't know, why are these people coming to me? Because they have a need or they really want to hear the gospel. So we call this low impact. Most of the mission activity I see locally is low impact. It's not getting to the message of the kingdom, the gospel, which is, by the way, when we share the gospel with people, we're really finding where the gospel is already at work. Now, the million-dollar question is, how do we move people in this category? And there's a lot of ways to do it. But we have seen that on a 30,000-foot level, there are three key things that need to be happening in the life of a believer and a church to begin to move people into this area. The first one is what we call vision. And I know that's just a big word, but it's constantly being spoken of from the word of God. This is what God's design is for your life. This is not my idea to grow church. This is not my plan for your life. This is what God's telling you to do. We're constantly stroking vision through the word of God that this is what he has intended. So we use one of the best poles or prods for obedience, and that's the word of God. The other one, and I'm going to put right here, is there's constant training. And that doesn't necessarily happen in a room, but, and I'm going to put next to that training mall. It needs to be, the training needs to implement model, assist, watch, launch, which is totally obedience based. They have to see it. You help assist with them, you watch and launch. So this training has to be based on mall, simple tools that can be reproduced. Now, the ultimate element that really makes both of these work is what we call death. Some type of death is going to be involved. Blackaby used to call it a crisis of belief. You can call whatever you want, but to pull a trigger, an adjustment has to be made. And so when you begin to see these three things firing off in a church, there's a specific place for training, division, and then there's a call to death. You begin to see disciple makers emerge. Now, let me say one last thing about this. I got pushed back one time on these two words, timid and bold. They felt like they were a little brash or but actually, which is really cool, this word is incredibly biblical. In fact, it's used all over the New Testament. So in fact, if you really want more on this word, there was a whole article written several years ago by a guy named James MacDonald. And let me just read the first paragraph to you, and I think it'll make sense. In many of God's commands, He gives his children freedom, focus in on it, freedom in the mechanics of obedience. For example, in marriage, a man and woman are to commit for a lifetime, but we're not told how that marriage is to be established day by day. We get principles, but not specifics. Pastors are to preach the word or teach the word, but many methods are biblical and the preacher is given freedom to choose. In only a few instances does the Lord or the Word of God prescribe both action and the method or posture. In my words, evangelism is one of those cases. And the biblical method of evangelism is boldness. And the article goes on basically to state, and it shows all the times the word boldness or fearless shows up in the New Testament in its many places. So the posture of evangelism is boldness. Now, that doesn't mean you're brash and you're in their face. And he goes through and shows several of the examples in the book of Acts and in other places in the New Testament. And then he defines what biblical boldness looks like. It's not a jerk, but it's truly the posture we are to have with the gospel. And the New Testament backs it up over and over again. So I hope you enjoyed this vision casting model for getting to the gospel in whatever your discipleship process is. Because if we're not getting to abundant seed sowing, like the parable of the sower, we're eventually not going to get to true multiplication, which is when we begin to see lostness being discipled and sharing the gospel.